Hi.
Today is February 18th, 2024, and we are here to interview Bob Simons, who after 52 years is stepping down from the Alachua Audubon Board. And so we are excited to hear about the early history of the Audubon Board and the projects that you worked on, and sharing some of your wisdom with us.
Okay, well,
I'm going to turn it over to you, Bob.
two things that I'm really bad at is history and remembering people's names, so you might take all this with a grain of salt. I came back, I'm a veteran from Vietnam. I came back from Vietnam and went 1 year up to NC State. I was working on a PhD degree, and then I came back here. And so it's not clear to me exactly which year I joined, but I'm going to say 1972. It might have been 71, but I was definitely working on Audubon projects in 1972. Helen Hood was president, I think, in maybe 71 or 72. Marjorie Carr had been president right before that. Joe Little was president in that time period, just after that. And John Hintermister, obviously, he was there. And lots of other people that, again, Grisella Forbes is one of a long time. She's still alive, I think. And that's somebody else you could interview or ask about what the early years were like. Yeah, I'm trying to think of people's names. But anyway, and Barbara Muschwitz was another one. Who was there early on. So I was mostly interested. Well, the reason I joined was I wanted to learn to ID the birds, learn about the birds. So I wanted to go on field trips. It was field trips that drew me in to want to be an Audubon board member, just so I could go out with people like John Hintermister on a field trip and he could educate me. Erica and I had been learning about other things. We had set up 7 freshwater fish tanks, and we were learning all the local freshwater fish. We were learning to identify them, and I knew the trees, and Erica and I together went on Dana Griffin's wildflower walks and so on. So we were just trying to learn about nature. But as soon as I joined, I found out, well, they have projects. They had just been donated the land for Coakley Hill Sanctuary. So that was a project. We wanted to fence that and put gates and put signs and mow trails and manage that sanctuary. So I became the sanctuary chairman early on because nobody else wanted to mess with it. And then I got on the conservation committee. Well, Helen Hood and Marjorie Carr and various other people had been working with the state to set up the state's land buying programs. The first one of which was the Environmentally Endangered Lands Program. So they had, and Florida Audubon and Sierra Club and various people had lobbied to change the state laws to enable Florida to buy large pieces of land for conservation. It was a big deal. And so that legislation got passed in 73 or 74. And Helen wanted to know, well, what here in Alachua County? They had already bought Paynes Prairie. That was done around 1970, 69 and 70 and 71, I think. But other than that, I mean, we have Olino State Park, but there weren't that many state parks around. But so Helen and I and Archie Carr and various other people, Dan Ward, said, well, San Flasco Hammock ought to be bought. You know, we ought to work on that. So I had been to forestry school. I knew how to put together a proposal. You know, I went down to the county and I figured out who owned what. You know, there were 10 major owners in San Flasco Hammock. So I found out what they owned and mapped it, you know, made a map. And everybody had wanted to buy a little piece of San Flasco Hammock. But I thought, you know, bigger is better. You ought to buy the whole thing. If it's too small, it's just going to get swamped by outside forces like invasive exotic plants and whatever. That still might destroy it eventually, but bigger is better. You can defend it better, and it'll support more species. And so we worked on, Helen Hood and I primarily together worked with help from lots of other people, including Archie Carr. All of these projects that I've worked on involve lots of people cooperating together to accomplish something. It's really hard for one person to do something all by themselves unless they recruit other people and they become the leader of a group of people. So anyway, it took 2 years. I mean, Helen Hood and I both spent probably 40 hours a week for 2 years, every week, getting San Flasco Hammock bought. But we did. We accomplished it. So that was an Alachua Audubon project. So that's probably one of our biggest projects ever, was accomplishing that. And it was a battle all the way through. And I remember at the end, in 1974, when it passed all the hoops, and it was proposed, the governor and cabinet would have to vote on each project that was proposed in the Environmentally Endangered Lands Program. So Helen was gone somewhere. She might have been in Australia or I don't know where. Anyway, I was the only one that went to the governor and cabinet meeting. And I got up there and immediately got blindsided by a couple of things. One was the owner of a square mile, 640 acres. It was a pair of University of Florida professors wanted to withdraw. They had agreed to sell. They already had a contract. The state had a contract with them where they had agreed to sell, but they wanted to pull out. They realized, well, if we don't sell, we could sell it for a lot more money in a couple of years, you know. But so I had to get up and speak against that, and you know, I don't know who it was a governor or a cabinet member, said, well, is this really critical for the project? And I had to answer to that. So I said yes, basically, and explained why. And that was the whole Blues Creek ecosystem part of San Flasco Hammock. Really, it was critical. So they kept that in. The other thing, which was even worse, was that they had a really horrible Department of Natural Resources director who pulled, you know, said one of the projects didn't qualify because a real estate agent was related to somebody or whatever. So there was 1,000 and something acres that went right up in the middle of it that he pulled out of the project. So that was disappointing. But anyway, they voted, they bought it. And I got one of the little side notes was that one of my neighbors that was over there, Mr. McMullen, worked for Doyle Connor, Department of Agriculture. He's a good friend of Doyle Connor. He got Doyle Connor to vote for San Francisco Hammock. Doyle Connor didn't vote for any of the other purchases, but he voted for that one.
Well, it's interesting that you were actually able to get all those landowners, the 10
It did make sense. Yeah,
landowners, to be willing to sell to the state.
it's miraculous.
Yeah.
I did some praying on it. I don't know if we had divine intervention or not, but that was surprising to me because it wasn't to any of their financial advantage.
Did any of them have homes on the property, or it was just they owned the property?
Yeah. And I'm sure they all knew that. But there was a lot of pressure, political, social pressure for them to sell it. The county commission was all in favor of it. I'm trying to think of the name of all of the conservation organizations like the Garden Club and so on were in favor of it. The Chamber of Commerce was unanimously in favor. That's the one that I thought was surprising to me. And so anyway, it got bought. There was this big piece that didn't get bought, which everybody else kind of quit advocating, so I ended up being the main advocate for that. And it got bought. 800 acres out of 1,200 got bought. The part that didn't get bought ended up being the Hammock 1 and Hammock 2 subdivisions.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that thing that went all the way up in the middle, most of that got bought, so it didn't go all the way up in the middle anymore. Yeah. So anyway, that was a big accomplishment early on in 72, 3, 4. It got bought in 74.
Do you recall how many acres was purchased for San Velasco?
It was 6,000 and something.
About
right now it's 7,000.
So it's over 6,000.
Yeah, because they've added a few pieces.
Wow.
So then there were a number of other. Well, first of all, there were additional programs. There was P2000 and all these other programs that kept putting money into the pot to buy lands, and so I advocated along with other people for various of these. One was the McLeod Ranch, which is added to Olino as River Ride State Preserve. We advocated for that. We advocated for Tosahatchee, east of Orlando. We advocated for the Fakahatchee Strand and various other things around the state. And it wasn't all hard work. I got to go visit these places and stay. I stayed for a week at Tosahatchee in a little cabin off in the wilderness all by myself. It was a lot of fun. But it was also a good thing to do.
That's interesting that Alachua Audubon was involved in projects throughout the state.
Okay, and now the lines started to get blurry because...
Or were you acting as a consultant or a...
Our Marjorie Carr left Alachua Audubon and formed FDE, Florida Defenders of the Environment. So a lot of the things that I did, they'd say, well, who do you represent? Well, a lot of times I said FDE because I joined FDE. So it's a little blurry as to whether some of this is mostly FDE or mostly Audubon, but San Velasco Hammock was definitely Alachua Audubon. And so was Riverwise. Some of these others, like Fakahatchee, that might have been mostly FDE. And then there was the question of who gets to manage these and how do they manage them. And I'd been to forestry school and I was a land manager. So I got to weigh in on how to manage all these places. And one of the big issues that came up, it's separate, well, it was a combination. I mean, Tosahatchee was similar, but the Forest Service throughout the entire country did a big rethink of how they managed the national forest of the United States in the 80s, 1980s. They came up with a 5-year plan, but they put a lot of planning effort into it. And I weighed in on that. And they had been doing pretty well, actually. They knew how to prescribe burn, which most of these other people weren't all that good at it or comfortable with it. But they had not done any growing season burning. It was all winter burning. So a number of people, myself included, advocated that they start doing growing season burning. And on the Ocala National Forest, this is divided into 2 ranger districts. There was a man named Jerry Klutz, who was the ranger in charge of the Lake George district, of the northern half of Ocala National Forest. And he was a really good man, conscientious. And he said, well, you know what? I'm gonna give it a try. So he did 5 or 6 big summer burns and loved it. The results were great. So that got him started doing that. And, we had a hand in that. Alachua Audubon and FDE together. So that was changing policy countrywide, really, that we had an impact on. I became a member of the Exotic Pest Council or whatever that thing was that Karen used to do, the newsletter.
Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council. Yeah.
So I had some input into that. That's a management issue. So I got, when they found out that I was willing for free to give management advice, I got on the Swanee River Waters Management District advisory board for managing their lands, and I got on the best management practices committee for forestry for Florida, and all sorts of things like that. And we got to go to all these meetings. And one of the things, a purchase that I worked on, helped to work on, was in association with Judy Hancock. I don't know if you guys know of her, but she lived in Lake City, and she was the Florida Sierra Club chair for something, conservation, I think, maybe. She was a tiny little woman, but strong. We'd go to these, she and I, for instance, were on this forestry forum that the forest industry created to kind of counterbalance mostly the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club wanted to do away with all sorts of things that the Forest Service did. clear cutting was their one other main objective. They wanted to do away with that. So they had this Florida Forest Forum to air some of these issues. And there's these great big burly forest managers and industry types, and they actually tried to bully Judy Hancock in some of these meetings. Didn't turn out well. She was tougher than all of them put together. But anyway, that was something we hashed out. For instance, wetlands, rules for clear cutting wetlands and rules for just best management practices for forestry. And I ended up on the Division of Forestry's best BMP advisory committee. So there's just one thing after another. And yeah. So that's kind of early on, up through the 1980s. The Forest Service shift was around 1985 is when they started doing prescribed burning in the summertime, growing season burning.
So why were they resistant? I mean, that's when we have the most rain, so
well, it's safer and easier to burn in the wintertime. They're less likely. The Forest Service, up to that point, they were a multiple use agency, but they were focused on timber production. And out west, also grazing. Not so much ecology or endangered species or that sort of thing. But they realized in around 1980 that they needed to update, they needed to change, they needed to pay more attention to recreation and ecology and endangered species and that sort of thing. So they put a big effort into redoing their management thinking. And so burning in the wintertime is good, but burning in the growing season, if you're trying to manage something like longleaf pine, wiregrass, sandhills, is much better. It kills out the invading hardwoods like laurel, oak, and sweet gum and cherry and so on. Much better if you burn after they leafed out. That'll kill them back much better. And wiregrass likes to be burned in the growing season. It responds better. And the whole system was basically adapted to growing season burning. I mean, that's when lightning strikes occur and so on. So does that answer that question pretty much?
yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it was a good thing. One of the things that had changed that I kind of liked the oak domes that occur in the sandhills in the Ocala National Forest, which are clones of sand live oak. They're all identical and they form this dome of little sand live oaks that are all crooked and whatever. Well, that's an artifact of them burning in the wintertime all the time. As soon as they switched over to growing season burning, that wiped those out. They didn't belong there, but they were really cool. So, yeah. You have to go with the whole package. So, what else you want to know about Life Audubon?
I'd like to know how and when you started the Kestrel project and what prompted you to do that.
It, well, somehow or another I met John Smallwood.
Mm-hmm.
And he had, well, before that, Susan Cerulean had been on Life Audubon board. She was Susan Mashburn when she was on the board. But she liked cerulean warblers, so she changed her name. So, and moved to Tallahassee. She became the non-game wildlife person for the state, for the Game Commission. And so we had already talked about this when she was here in Gainesville, but I wanted something to be done to help kestrels. The breeding population here in Florida was declining, and it looked bad. So she wrote up a proposed program and got it funded to study kestrels. And John Smallwood got the grant to do it, and he was here at the University of Florida. So he designed excellent kestrel boxes, and his plan was to put 300 kestrel boxes up in Marion County and Levy County and Alachua County and nearby Putnam County maybe. And because his thought was that one of the main issues for kestrels was their cavity nesters was not enough cavities. So he was going to build these little boxes to provide the cavities and then put them in appropriate habitat. So he did. And the first 13 boxes that he put up, I helped him put them up. We did it together. And so I learned from him how to make the boxes, how to put them up, what kind of habitat, where to put them up, all that. And some of the things to look out for. And that was 1982 is when we put those up. No, 1992, excuse me, 1996. I would have got graded off on that, on my history, by my history kid. 92. So his results were pretty spectacular. The populations of kestrels increased. And he had gotten permission to put the boxes on utility poles, so all I had to do was drive down the various roads, put them on the utility poles, and then monitor. And so it was working great, but he learned all sorts of things. Like what's the main cause of mortality for baby kestrels in boxes 16 feet up above the ground on a utility pole? What's the main threat?
Snakes or fire ants?
Fire ants. Yeah. So we use Amdro, and we locate nests and put Amdro around the nest, and we put Amdro around the pole. So that helped. And a guy named Richard Melvin figured out a way to put Amdro in a little wire cage in the box itself underneath the litter, and that also helped. But anyway, so then I thought, well, I can make those boxes and put them up too. So I started doing that. And then there was a guy named Bruce Christensen on the board. Oh, that's Audubon. I decided that I wanted it to be an Audubon, that's Audubon project, so that I had a little bit of political cover for what I was doing. And I could say, well, this is an Audubon project that might get me on a private landowner's property quicker than just saying, well, I'm a crazy veteran with nothing better to do. So anyway, so I presented it to the board. Well, he was on the board. He said, I'm all in favor of that, but I think we could make a lot more boxes. I could get a Boy Scout troop to make the boxes. And so we did, and we made 100 boxes, which was a lot more than I was ready to put up.
How many?
But anyway,
100.
100?
that was not 2006 that we started. That's when we made those 100 boxes. And I had to kind of finish the boxes. They put them together with little wire brads that they shot in with some kind of gun, and that wasn't.
Oh, wait.
Okay.
Tell us about the acquisition of Pinhook Swamp.
Okay. So Judy Hancock and a bunch of other people. She didn't initiate the effort actually, but she took it over and carried it through of getting the Pinhook Swamp acquired in order to connect the Osceola National Forest to the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, making it one of the biggest wildlife areas in the country. And through her efforts and other people's efforts, but she'd just write letters after letters after letters and go talk to politicians and whatever, and wouldn't take no for an answer. Kind of like what Marjorie Carr would do, only a very different personality. So toward the end of that, I remember there was a U.S. Representative Crenshaw from Jacksonville, a Republican, who was on a committee, Forest Service maybe or whatever, that was kind of critical for getting the funding from the feds to do this. And Judy was dying of cancer, so she couldn't drive herself over there with her little black pickup truck. So I went up and I drove her over and we talked to this guy. And we got it done. It's really hard to say no.
Well, one of the things I remember you being involved in is the Plum Creek, when they were, wanting to buy up
Oh,
the
yeah.
land,
Yeah, I got involved
east
in
of
that.
Gainesville, and you were really involved in reviewing all those plans and
Yeah.
identifying the parcels that it was reasonable for them to develop and the ones that weren't.
And we won that battle.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was also a battle that had to do with the Santa Fe Swamp, which is like a 9,000 acre swamp that's the headwaters of the Santa Fe River. Georgia Pacific owned it, and they wanted to mine the peat. And they wanted to make a gigantic peat mine out of it. So we fought against that. And I remember nobody that we knew had ever walked across it or looked at the middle of it. I mean, you could see it from aerial photos. So I walked across it and then back. And that was fun.
Because you yellow through the woods.
Oh yeah, I like that.
So when you advocated against it being a peat mine, was it in private ownership then? And
Yeah,
then
Georgia Pacific owned it.
and they owned it, and then you went on to help get it preserved?
Yeah, I don't remember the details, but it ended up being in public ownership. It's owned by the Swanee River Water Management District.
Can you talk more about, I remember the Plum Creek also, and I remember us having a meeting here at your house, and Charles Lee came up and Mike Byerly,
Yeah.
and you were connecting
Oh, yeah.
Charles Lee
I
and Mike
remember that.
Byerly. Can you talk about Plum Creek and what you were advocating for and the process, whatever
Oh.
you remember about that?
Well, it had to do with zoning. They wanted to rezone some of these big forestry parcels so that they could develop them and make more money. And the county had already been spent a lot of time and money and effort in getting really good zoning for the county. And so it was an attack on that, is one way to look at it. So we defended the county's zoning rules, and we won. And there's lots of details in there. But anyway.
And I think we diverged from Audubon, Florida on our position, didn't we? Audubon, Florida was more about let's be at the table
Yeah,
and
yeah.
not antagonize Plum Creek.
Yeah, they weren't necessarily on our side.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think we got some
they've been drinking the Kool-Aid.
we got some emails saying, you know, that this isn't the Audubon, Florida position.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we run into that several times. We ran into that with management for Paynes Prairie, too. George Kirkpatrick and other powerful people wanted Paynes Prairie to be managed by the Game Commission, and they wanted it to be managed, or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and be managed for duck hunting. And so that was a kind of controversial issue where Elisha Audubon said, no, let's manage it based on ecology. And I'm sure we, you know, as time is going on, I'm sure we were absolutely right about that. Archie Carr was on our side. We had a powerful ally.
Well, and then again, another, it's probably a decade later, DEP wanted to institute grazing and lumbering and
Oh yeah,
and the Protect Paynes Prairie coalition formed, and you were one of
we
them.
had a wonderful governor at the time. Scott was his name,
Yeah, Rick Scott.
and then he had appointed somebody to be DNR chief. Anyway, yeah, they were trying to squeeze a little money out of all the state. They wanted to log places like San Velasco Hammock and have more grazing on Paynes Prairie and so on. Fortunately, I guess they've moved on, although Scott is a senator. He's in a position to do bad things. But, yeah.
Well, and I think our current governor's distracted by his presidential ambitions, so
Yeah.
DEP's just not on his radar.
Going back to the kestrels, would you have any guess at how many kestrel boxes you have helped to install, and what?
Yeah, I mean, I've written that up in reports in the past.
Yeah,
Around 150.
I've got that kind of stuff.
You've installed helped install about 150? I know you sent me up on ladders a few times.
I know. I remember it well. Sealand Creek Boulevard was
Yeah.
one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's used by kestrels every year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But a lot of them we put up in places that just weren't good enough. The kestrels never used them. But they might have used half of them at one time or another.
So what makes for better kestrel habitat?
Well, it needs to be really open. Cattle pasture's perfect. If you had a lone cabbage palm or pine tree out in the middle of 1,000 acres of cattle pasture, you put a kestrel box on it, it'd probably get used. If you have 40 acres of cattle pasture and the only place to put the box is around the edge somewhere, it's probably not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Why not? Why not?
Well, the kestrels are smarter than we are, so they realize that if they're on the edge, flying squirrels can get to their nest and eat their eggs and babies. So they just don't like to nest in places like that.
Bob, didn't you have a role in the Orange Lake management when FWC wanted to herbicide?
Yeah, that didn't turn out so well. But yes, I was sanctuary chairman for a number of years. So we had Bird Island out in Orange Lake, which was, and that's to let you know that it didn't turn out well. It was a significant rookery. In fact, it was one of the only, maybe one of two rookeries in the entire state that didn't get decimated during the plume years when they were killing all the herons and egrets for plumes for ladies' hats. That was defended. Some of those wardens, some of them were shot. I mean, it was a dangerous job.
Yeah.
But that was one that was defended successfully. And there were thousands of birds, snowy egrets and great egrets and various other birds that nested there. Well, the Game Commission and the University of Florida, among others, wanted to manage Orange Lake so that people could get in and out of the boat ramps without getting blocked in by rafts of hyacinths. And they wanted to reduce spatterdock. There were big patches of spatterdock out there that were a hindrance to these $10,000 high-speed bass boats that people like George Kirkpatrick would ride around in. So they were doing a lot of herbicide spraying. Also, Orange Lake was pretty famous for floating islands. Well, if a floating island floated in and blocked a boat ramp, oh, that was terrible. So they wanted to get rid of all the floating islands, which is a unique and ecologically valuable part of Orange Lake, but they poisoned all of them. They got rid of them. Well, in the process, they poisoned Bird Island. They killed all the bushes, the birds left, and they haven't come back. They wiped out an ancient, really important rookery, basically on purpose. They won't admit it's on purpose, but I got some nasty letters from University of Florida and the Game Commission for pointing this out. Yeah, so that's a battle. That's a major battle that we lost, and it's not coming back.
Is the island itself still there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no place for a bird to nest. So.
Mm.
All the bushes are dead.
But the FWC more recently than that wanted to herbicide Orange Lake again.
Oh yeah, they herbicide
And they
every
came
year.
to us and tried to get us to be stakeholders
Yeah.
and support it, and we said no. We would conditionally, if they put in large buffers around Bird Island and other islands.
Right.
And
Yeah, I used to go to those meetings, but the meetings were basically swamped by,
fishermen and hunters that want boat access.
yeah. So we don't count for much there. And plus, we've lost the fight. There's a big rookery out off of Cedar Key somewhere that we've lost as well.
Yeah.
We weren't involved in that fight.
Well, I don't think that they've never really
And it's not
determined
clear, it's not clear
why.
why.
Yeah.
Do you remember Keep the Bar Open, Bar Hammock, when they wanted to close part of Bar Hammock, and Audubon, the Conservation Committee, and John Hennemister was on the board at that time, and he, so they wanted to close one of the landowners whose house faces it, wanted to close the rim trail around
Right.
Bar Hammock. And so you would go part of the way around, then have to reverse.
Yeah.
And so John Hennemister came up with the slogan, "Keep the bar open." And we made little
Yeah.
pens, and we went to the county commission meeting, and you were involved in that.
Yes. Yeah, I took Chuck Chestnut out there and showed him what it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really nasty, extreme Republican operative guy. He wanted his own access to that trail.
They had it. Had
And
he built
he
a
built it. He
little
actually, he
ramp
had
or
actually
something?
built an access to the trail so he could use it, but the public couldn't use it. Well, it's public land.
I think that was very important because Audubon was very instrumental in keeping that trail open to the public.
Yeah. And those guys, that guy was so nasty. He came to a land conservation board meeting with a couple other guys, and they set up video cameras and recorded the meeting, and they basically attacked us for having that trail there. They were nasty people. Yeah. I don't think they intimidated me or anybody else there. They certainly didn't intimidate John Henner in this group.
Well, and the county commission did vote to keep it open,
Yeah,
so we prevailed on that one.
yep. We won that one.
A lot of important battles.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep, you can't win them all, but we've won a lot of important battles.
Well, and the vision of acquiring San Francisco State Park, and that would be all homes now. If
Oh,
we
yeah.
hadn't done that back in the
Yeah.
70s, you know.
Oh yeah, it would all look like the Hammock 1 and Hammock 2 subdivisions. Or probably worse, it'd probably be much higher density by now.
Yeah, you might have a shopping center out there now.
Yeah, right.
Another Publix.
Yeah.
Golf courses.
Oh God.
Is there anything else that you want to reflect on with Audubon that comes to mind?
Well, one of the things that comes to mind, and this is just my opinion, is probably the most important thing. It's really important for us to identify conservation issues where we can have a positive impact and advocate. That's been my role, and I think that's really important. The other thing that I think is really important are the field trips. That's why I joined to start with, and the field trips are extremely educational. You know, somebody that doesn't know birds very well can go on those field trips and learn all about the birds.
And then they can get involved in conservation issues.
Yeah, and then they care and start
Yeah.
caring about it.
Yeah. It's a win-win.
It's the gateway drug.
Yeah, right.
So some of this other stuff that we do is less important than that, I think. I think the internship stuff is great. That's really important.
And with field trips, we have 5 different programs for field
I know.
trips. Yeah, it's not just the weekend field
I
trips
know.
now. It's
Yeah. And it's all good. Yeah, if you have to be drinking beer while you're looking at birds, I have no problem with that.
You probably average 30 people on all the Birds and Brews trips.
Yeah.
They're really popular.
I think that's a great
Yeah.
thing that we do.
And they're almost all new
Yeah,
birders. You know, we loan out all our binoculars almost every time.
yeah, I think that's wonderful.
You know.
Well, thank you, Bob.
Oh, you're
This-
welcome.
I know this barely touches on the 52 years of your tenure on
Yeah,
Audubon, but these are the highlights that come to mind for you that
Yeah.
have been important, that have been impactful for you and impactful for the community.
yeah. Yeah, I wish I could remember names and dates better. There's so many people that were involved in all that. And that's the one real weakness of this interview is that I'm not mentioning everybody. Michael Meisenberg was one of the people he was president for a while. John Wynn was president, I think maybe 5 years in a row or something like that. He was a really good president. Somebody named Debbie Siegel's been president for a while. She's a really good president. Yeah.
And Anne, you were president?
Well, I was kind of a caretaker president.
Yeah, I was president twice, and I was sort of the same thing. I just wanted to hold it all together until somebody else could come along. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Bob. Thank you for this. This was really special.
And thanks for everything you've done for Alachua Audubon and for Gainesville.
Yes.
Well, thank you for bringing me a good lunch.
Now you get to take a nap.
Yes, exactly.
That was great. That was just great. And you remembered a lot of stuff, Bob. You really remembered a lot of stuff. All the